RedNet videos for producing what I think was a fantastic snapshot of the history of Bookmarks. Good evening, comrades and friends. Welcome to Bloomsbury Baptist Church, and thanks to the church for hosting tonight's event. My name's Brian Richardson, and I have the immense pleasure and privilege of being your compere for this evening. It's sold out, by the way, which I think is an absolute tribute to the esteem with which Bookmark, which is just across the road from here, is held. And I think that the number of messages and the calibre of the contributions that you just saw on the screen there are an indication of just how much esteem Bookmarks is held in and has been held in for decades. So that's what tonight is all about, and obviously for reasons that we all know far too well, it just has not been possible to meet on evenings like this, for occasions like this, for far too long now, and it really is a pleasure for me to look out and see very many people who I've known for decades. It's great to see you still around, but it's also people who have been part of the history of Bookmarks, but it's also fantastic to see so many people who I don't recognise, who will hopefully be ensuring that Bookmarks continues to survive and thrive for very many more years to come. So on that note, let me hand over to a fantastic panel that we've got. We've divided the evening into two parts, hopefully half and half. It is a Saturday evening, so we don't want to be too formal about this. We want to, have fun and entertainment. So we are going to have poetry, we're going to have music, we're going to have anecdotes, as well as hopefully some very informative contributions. And I will introduce people as they speak. I'm going to begin. I'm going to take us back to the early 1970s, 1973, a year when there was an oil crisis leading to high prices, a punishingly high rate of inflation, and large-scale industrial unrest. So a world completely different to the one that we're living in now. And I'm going to start with Fergus Nicol. Take us back to that time. And Fergus, if you will, tell us about the circumstances in which Bookmarks came about, how, why, and with what hopes for the future at that stage. Fergus.
We do go back further than that.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
We had a situation where in 1967 there were very few shops, radical shops outside London, and people in London were finding it difficult to get books. And what I was asked to do is to set up a book service, send stuff by post, and sort out this problem. Of course, in 1967, we didn't realise that the next year was going to be 1968.
Presumably you realised it would be 1968.
Even I, as a physicist, couldn't work that out. So 1968 was the beginning of the high point of politics, really. Between then, 1968, and the early 70s. The problem was that it was wonderful, that period was really wonderful for us socialists, because we could see things happening which we really wanted to happen. And that was the period in which we were working. I was working there till about early 90s. 20 years. And 20 years where things really slowly changed for the worse, unfortunately. We started out, we thought, a lot of people were really pleased that the Labour Party got in. But the ruling class were really fed up with suddenly finding themselves in a difficult situation. And so what they did is they they took the Labour Party and they used them to bring the political temperature down by giving them real financial problems. Nobody in Britain would give them any money, and the IMF wouldn't give them any money either. So that was a really difficult time, and a time when unemployment and as a side result, fascism really were a problem, began to be a problem. So we were working in that situation, and what we saw as our job was to make sure that everybody. I remember, the other thing I remember is my father, who was a member of the Communist Party, saying, if you want to know whether somebody is in the Communist Party or not, count how many books they have on their shelves. Because the Communist Party and Golantz had really made efforts to make sure that everybody who was interested could get books by people who we might not completely compare ourselves to, but so what we did was we set up a thing where we tried to sell as many books to people as we could, because we thought that this would be a useful thing to do, particularly as you're a book service. So when we opened the book service provided books by post to anybody who wrote to ask for them. They made sure in local areas there were bookstall organisers. They would make sure that there were plenty the books that were relevant at that time, because everything changes. Politics doesn't stay the same. So, 1 month it's one thing, and the next month is another. So we had a network of bookstall organisers who would make sure that appropriate things were there. We also did a couple of other things, which we set up the Bookmarks Club, and we would send books out to them every month. They would be given the option of different selections of books,
Fergus, if I could, if I could ask you that, obviously that postal service, if you like, was clearly achieved a degree of success, so that at some point it was decided to set up and open a physical bookshop. That's right?
Yeah.
When and why was that decision taken?
The organisation was quite small then. I mean, we would have been able to have all the members of the organisation in half this room, it was hundreds. Okay. Let me just finish quickly.
Yeah, sure.
We also ran a socialist book bus, which was an old library van which went around and showed films and sold books. And we got involved with other bookshops. We felt that it was important that everybody should have access to books. So we joined the Federation of Radical Booksellers and ran the and published the Radical Bookseller, which was
There's someone's phone now.
Someone's phone. It was a miracle. Very good singing.
It is a Radical Bookseller was a that's all I can say.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much. Thank you both for that contribution and for bringing Bookmarks into being, so to speak. I'm going to fast forward now, and you'll have seen on the film that Bookmarks moved from its original physical home in Finsbury Park. I think that might now be a kebab shop, actually. Moved to Bloomsbury in 1997. Very different political atmosphere, and as Fergus indicated, for much of the period between 1973 and 1997 was a very difficult time for socialists, for the left, and certainly would have been a difficult time for independent bookshops. 1997 was, of course, the year that the Thatcher government and the Tory government that had been in office after that were finally kicked out, and we had New Labour coming in with Tony Blair. Simon Hester, Simon, you were the manager of Bookmarks at the time that it moved from Finsbury Park to Bloomsbury, weren't you? Now, I know that you're obviously not a man with impeccable judgment, because I think I was one of the people that you asked to come and help try and put some shelves up, and I'm sure those shelves probably lasted about a day or so. But Simon, tell us...
The shelves or you?
Both of us, you. Simon, tell us, what reflections do you have on Bookmarks, and particularly your time working there?
So I started working at Bookmarks in 1992, and there was no plan to move. The plan was just to try and build on the existing success of a local general bookshop in North London, which also had a reach across the country because it was a socialist bookshop. There were lots of socialist bookshops, or quite a few socialist bookshops around the country at that time. I think it's important to, for people who are old, like me, you can think back perhaps to that time, but in 1992, this was in the aftermath of the collapse of the Thatcher regime. She'd been booted out by a mass campaign of civil disobedience and non-payment of the poll tax, and that, which had been led by the radical left at national level and at local level. The Labour Party and the unions played virtually no role in any of it apart from fingering people and telling the police who to arrest. In 1992 as well, just to remember, it's a long time ago, but in central London there was a march of 250,000 workers in protest at a government announcement they were going to have a whole second round of pit closure programmes. It was a dramatic moment. This is 1992. Labour was moving to the right, continuing to move to the right, with the politics of new realism, you can't fight, etc., dominating the unions. So that it was obvious, seemed obvious, that there was an opening here for the radical left and the revolutionaries and the socialists to make a move and to make gains. But paradoxically, most of the left, the vast bulk of the left in this country and internationally, was in despair, because in 1989-1990 the Soviet Union collapsed, and what for them was actually existing socialism, even if it wasn't brilliant, it was better than what we have here, had demoralised a whole generation of socialists and activists on the left. The Communist Party, which had been the biggest organisation by a long, long way for many, many years in this country on the left, was in the process of dissolving itself. It dissolved itself in the early 1990s. This was an intensely political period of, is socialism finished? Is there a possibility for socialism? These were debates that were taking place. And obviously, in that situation, a socialist bookshop and socialist organisation was quite important to try and point the way forward. So first was Thatcher's demise, second, the fall of the Soviet Union, and then thirdly, at the end of 1992, September 1992, there was a cataclysmic moment for British capitalism of Black Wednesday, when the pound collapsed, the Tory government was in total turmoil, and capitalism was in massive crisis, and there was a nasty recession, a big squeeze on people's spending power in the immediate aftermath of that, and in that process, dozens and dozens of independent bookshops, independent record shops, independent cinemas started collapsing because people didn't have the spending power, the extra bit of spending power to spend on luxuries like books and CDs and records and whatever. In the process, the biggest bookshop on the left in Britain, Colette's, down the road, on Tottenham Court Road, 1993, they went bust. And so there was, central London had no big socialist bookshop anymore. And it was off the back of that the idea started to percolate that, well, if there needed to be a central London bookshop, why shouldn't it be us? Why shouldn't it be Bookmarks? I'll step aside slightly, recap. Throughout that whole period, from the late 1980s into the 1990s, Bookmarks had worked quite hard to try and develop a trade union book service, working with the TUC and with unions. Comrades organised, I think she's here, Lindy Gonzalez, particularly organising systematic attempt to get socialist bookshops and socialist bookstores into the trade union conferences. And we did it. I mean, they did it. It was massively physically hard labour, just with a trolley and a couple of boxes of books, and working really hard to get to places like Bridlington and Llandudno and all sorts of weird places out there. And they built it up a bit. But then, partly because of the collapse of things like Collette's and other bookshops, and the work, particularly of Lindy, we were able to get Bookmarks to have the main bookstall at a TUC Congress. I'm not sure if it was 1993 or 1995, around about then, and we blew them away because we put on a massively professional bookstall. It was very, very good. They wanted us to come back. It worked really well. I think we had Tony Benn and Seamus Milne coming to do a book signing, and everybody. It was a great event. It was for us, and it was a big step in the history of Bookmarks. And so, off the back of all that, we decided we wanted to move to central London. And I can remember meeting the business manager of the TUC at that time. I can't remember his name. Around about then, 95, 96, to discuss. We want to move to central London. We've been the bookstall at TUC congresses. We do a good job, we work well together, will you back us? And they did, and they provided the estate agent to help find the venue, to find the premises. They supported, not overtly and totally, they knew exactly our politics and what was going on here, but they liked the idea of a bookshop near them where they could sell their stuff and it would be part of a wider labour movement bookshop. So that's how that came about. The pitch was a socialist and a trade union bookshop in central London, servicing the wider trade union movement. We wanted to have a professional, really good bookshop. This wasn't going to be a tatty round the corner little shop where you see a few newspapers from various small groups and tatty leaflets and pamphlets. We wanted to have all the best books. We wanted to be the flagship of socialism in central London. We needed money. We had Tony Benn, Seamus Milne, Paul Foote in a big money fundraising operation. TUC found us the premises. It was cheap. It was dilapidated. But then the key thing that happened then was people like Brian were invited to come and help try and make it. And dozens, many of them in this room, dozens of people came in and helped us. I want to name a couple of people in particular. Jim Sullivan, who can't be here today, was the project manager. And we had a very, very limited budget. We were really tight on the budget, which is why we had to, for example, if you want to see what the technicalities of putting a bookshop here, we couldn't afford bookshelves. But there's no way we could even afford second-hand bookshelves. So we had to make them ourselves, and we had cheap components, and the key thing that we had that could beat anybody else is that we had free voluntary labour. And large numbers of socialists came in and they spent days and days varnishing bits of wood. If you look at the shelves in there now, they go from ceiling to floor, and it's a steel screw rod. It was taken from a very small example of an IKEA bookshelf. We expanded that to fit a whole shop. They were very, very cheap, these steel pieces, rods, that's the word, thank you. They had a screw, but to get the bookshelves on, you had to spin a nut all the way down from the top to the bottom on 2 steel rods, fit the wood on it, and then put another 2 nuts all the way down and go like that all the way up. So we had 20, 30, 40 people in that room just spinning away. Often I was underneath trying to count the money or work out what's going on, and it sounded like a weird double bass jazz band up there coming through the floor. It was an amazing sight to see. And there were people like Neil Smith, who was here, who put in prodigious hours. I remember on the night before we opened, November the 1st, 1997, on the day before, we weren't ready. We weren't bloody ready. So Neil and some other comrades, I had to ask to stay the night and work through the night to try and get us ready, and we did just about get ready for November the 1st. And the attempt was to have a welcoming, big showcase shop for the left, for the movement, for socialism in central London. And although lots and lots of bookshops, like Colette's was the main one, but there were lots of others collapsing, we took a punt on the movement, on the politics, on relying on the wider movement to survive in a difficult situation. And that's what Winston James missed out. He said in his little thing there, it's amazing that you managed to survive all this time. What we had was the ideas and the politics, but the thing that made it happen and connected it all together was organisation and people on the ground willing to put the work in and put the effort in.
Yay.
The organisation and the ideas went together to make a bookshop.
I think you can hear from the reaction what people thought of that contribution. They were momentous and heady times. And you've reminded me actually that we do in fact have a message of support from the TUC, which I'd just like to read out briefly. It says this: TUC publications and bookmarks go back a long way, from the early move from Finsbury Park to Bloomsbury, when TUC General Secretary John Monks acted as a guarantor for the new shop, right up to this day, when everything TUC Publications does includes Bookmarks as a partner. We have loved being with them through the hard work and often difficult conditions, which has them still at the forefront of the independent bookshops, still alive and kicking in 2023. Here's to another 50 years. Love and best wishes on your anniversary, and that's from TUC Publications. Of course, as you said, they were challenging times as well. One of the things you didn't mention, Simon, was of course the resurgence after over a decade in the doldrums of fascists and the far right, with the British National Party, the Nazi BNP, winning its first council seat in 1993, and that fomenting a huge, significant upsurge in racist attacks and so on. And there needed to be a huge, and there was a huge and successful challenge to that. But we know that the ever-present threat of fascists re-emerging, and so one of the things you will have seen on the film was the response back in 2018 when there was an attack by fascists, an attempted attack on the bookshop. And I should also say today, actually, send out solidarity to all of those people around the country who've been calling demonstrations against groups like the Patriotic Alternative, who've been trying to revive the racist and far right. It's a measure of the important work that has to go on. Simon, you just wanted to add something about that, didn't you?
Throughout all that period, and before obviously, the struggle in Ireland against British imperialism and so on, and a divided Ireland, was a major issue in British politics and had been for decades. Bookmarks in Finsbury Park, quite a working class with area with a big Irish community, we always had a very, very strong Irish section in the bookshop, trying to deal with all the issues, trying to cover all the things. At that time, by the early 1990s, the British state, the British ruling class, had realised that they couldn't defeat the Republican movement. And behind the scenes, secret talks and sometimes not so secret talks were going on throughout that period. In 1994, so this is just a couple of years before we opened the new shop, the IRA declared a ceasefire based on those talks and the peace process going on, but Sinn Féin, the leaders of Sinn Féin, were still banned from speaking, being shown on British TV and on British radio. You couldn't hear them, the British state censored them. They weren't allowed to speak. And in 1995, Jeremy Corbyn, some of you might have heard of, invited Gerry Adams to launch his new book that he'd written in the House of Commons, breaking the ban, effectively, and taking radical republicanism right into the heart of the mother of parliament, the cradle of democracy, and all the rest of it, which of course they promptly banned. That wasn't allowed. Gerry Adams was not allowed to launch his book, even though he was invited by an elected MP. Foyles, the big central London bookshop, were then going to be launching his book in central London. They came under heavy media bombardment and pulled out almost instantly, and plucky Bookmarks stepped into the breach. And in 1995, we had a surreal experience of Gerry Adams launching his new book and doing a book signing in the bookshop in Finsbury Park, but we weren't allowed to publicise it. He didn't want it publicised, nobody wanted it publicised. There were just a few Sinn Féin supporters who'd been told about it, and they came along, queued up, got their books, and there were quite a few people wandering around in, well, you weren't sure who they were exactly, but there were definitely state people there and all sorts wandering about. But it happened. And then later on, because we did that, and we stuck our neck out, nothing happened. We stuck our neck out. The peace process went on, the Anglo-Irish Agreement was coming along, and in 1997, just after we'd opened the bookshop, Gerry Adams was launching another book. He wrote a lot of books at that time. He launched another book about the peace process, the inside story of the peace process, and the publisher and Gerry Adams approached us in the new shop around the corner to do a book signing, and then said, and this is kind of by the by, we're also going to go and meet Tony Blair. And that was the day that Martin McGuinness and Gerry Adams went to Downing Street, and a historic moment, for whatever you think about the Anglo-Irish Agreement, it was a historic moment for the leaders of the Republican movement in the north of Ireland to go to 10 Downing Street to meet the Prime Minister of Britain and do the Anglo-Irish Agreement and sort of sign it and all that kind of thing. Before they went, it wasn't just Gerry Adams and Martin McGuinness. The entire leadership of Sinn Féin came to Bookmarks and had a meeting in our little office downstairs. It was a euphoric atmosphere. There was lots of backslapping and hugging, and there was people queuing up down the streets. It was a public event. It was a big event. In the middle of all this, Gerry Adams was signing books, Bookmarks had a minor footnote in the history of the struggle, comrades. It was from Bookmarks to Downing Street.
Thank you very much, Sam, a great contribution. And I'm glad you've got the microphone, Sheila, because I'm going to move straight on to Sheila McGregor. Now, Sheila, you're going to take us away from London, I think, aren't you? Up to Birmingham and talk about Bookmarks and Birmingham and the experience outside of the capital.
Right, well, first of all, I need to pay tribute to the people who actually set up the bookshop in Birmingham in 1972. It was apparently Colin Faulkner who initially started what was called the Socialist and Trade Union Bookshop in Birmingham, and then John Murphy, who now is in Manchester, I think, or Liverpool, who then took on being manager of the bookshop. And then I only landed up there in 1975 as, when I got sent there, or early 1976 actually, as the organiser for the International Socialists in Birmingham. And the Socialist and Trade Union Bookshop in Birmingham was Birmingham was a huge industrial city in that time. You know, at that time you actually had all the car plants, you know, and all the Lucas plants and so on and so forth, which were well organised. And so there was, what the Socialist and Trade Union Bookshop was, really it was the centre both of the International Socialists that became the Socialist Workers' Party, because we had meeting rooms, so branches could meet there, the local branch committee and district committee could meet there. but it also became a centre for solidarity. So the bookshop, in the end of the day, had the reputation. If you needed solidarity, if you were on strike, if you needed collections, then you got in touch with the bookshop. But the one, thanks, Simon. The thing that really I want to talk about is I want to draw the connection between really what happened in Liverpool last week and William Shawcross and what happened in 1981 to us in the bookshop. I've just been reading the Shawcross report, in which he says the emphasis has to shift in terms of where the real threats of terrorism come from. And he argues that they actually come from Muslims, and therefore the focus has to go from Muslims. And there's been far too much focus on really on the far right. Is this still working?
Yeah.
Oh, right, okay. So the truth is that is not the case, and we know that. We know from what Brian has already mentioned, what happened in Knowsley last Friday, and what is happening around the country, the targeting of refugees, and we know that it's driven from the top. We know that when we have the constant barrage from from prime ministers and home office ministers and so on and so forth, that actually that pulls people from the bottom into doing violent actions. And so I really want to talk about how the fascists have always recognised the danger of books. We understand the importance of books. I know the importance of books from my point of view in terms of the first book service and what Bookmarks came in terms of developing my ideas and shaping my ideas, and the revolutionary socialist tradition has always understood that books are weapons. But the fascists understand that too, which is why the Nazis always wanted to burn the books. And on March the 31st in Birmingham, there was a guy called Richard Barnes who wanted to celebrate his 21st birthday party. And his 21st birthday, he started on his birthday. There were 4 actual attempts to murder people. The first started when he took out a crossbow in his car and he directed his crossbow, and I'm going to name the individuals, at Karamat Hussein, who was only 26. And the only reason he didn't kill him was because the firing mechanism didn't work properly and it missed his heart. And that's what the surgeon said, who, otherwise a couple of millimetres and he'd have been dead. He then tried to mow down 2 Asian girls in his car, and he said, they ran across my path and I only managed to hit the shopping bag of one of them. He then pounced on a 60-year-old called Richard Coates, who was eating lunch in the car park in Yardley. And he was pistol whipped by Richard Barnes, but fortunately, and this shows the importance of resistance, 2 youngsters ran to the rescue and chased him off. But the next person he persuaded, using his weapon to drive him down to London, and then he laid low in London. It was a Christopher Rodman who he forced to drive down to London. He had an air pistol and a razor, and he forced him to drive down to London. He then landed up at in Watford, and this is where he managed to hijack Heather Bridge and her car in a car park. And on the 31st of March, he drove his car. He got Heather Bridges tied up in the boot of his car, and by this time he'd got a 5-gallon tin of petrol. And there were 6 of us in the bookshop. God, it's quite hard actually retelling the story. But there were 6 of us in the bookshop, a couple of people who just come in as customers to look for books. Myself with one of the leading strikers from Ansell's, because that was a major strike taking place against the closure of the brewery and in defence of jobs. And I just popped back there really to see if there were any messages, because there weren't mobile phones in those days, so you had to rely on the on BT and the landline. So I just gone back there to see if there were any messages I needed to pick up. So there were 6 of us there, and all of a sudden the door flew open, and this can of petrol rolled in towards us in the bookshop, and immediately the books in there it caught fire. And it was obvious that we weren't actually going to be able to get out through the front door, so we ended up having to go out the back and on the roof, and we were all saved, and we were all okay. But the tragedy was that the woman Heather Bridges, who was tied up in the boot of the car, she died, because of course the trail of petrol, when he rolled a can of petrol out of the car into our bookshop, it went backwards into the car, and she died. Well, he got life, but he actually said, and I'll read the quote, when he was immediately arrested because he stood and watched what he'd done. He showed absolutely no remorse, but he did say to a friend that he hadn't meant to kill Mrs. Bridges, but he was angry that those of us who were in the Didworth bookshop had escaped with our lives. He was absolutely determined, just like fascists and Nazis are, to both eradicate socialists, to defeat socialists physically, and to defeat the bookshops. And what is really, really important, actually, is the continued existence of the Socialist Workers' Party as an organisation, stand up to racism, and the tradition of books, which actually underpins the way in which we build united fronts to contest racism, to defeat the Nazis, which we've been able to do so far, which we will continue to do in the future as we take on the patriotic, whatever they like to call themselves. We're trying to wind this up all against refugees.
Sheila, that was obviously a very sobering story, but the message that you gave us there at the end was an incredibly important and powerful one. I'm going to read out another message of support now, and it's this. This is from Sheila Rowbottom. I have many good memories of meetings at Bookmarks, and I'm grateful to all of the workers there for their encouragement and commitment. I always liked meeting Judy Thor too, because she exuded an infectious warmth and enthusiasm every time I came along with a new book to promote, and whenever I was inclined to... I'm getting old. Whenever I was inclined to falter, there was Taplin's inspiring dialectical spiral providing uplift, whoosh and onwards. As I say, that's from Sheila Rowbottom, feminist writer, and the Judy Thor that she was referring to is someone who's...
I told you to leave that bit out, right?
I won't then, I will just hand the mic over, so to speak, to Judy.
Okay, thanks very much. Well, I took over in the shop in 1998, and I was very lucky because of the years that followed and what was going on. But I have to say that whatever we managed to do, and some of it you saw on the screen, couldn't have happened without the back room in Cotton Gardens or the book service, couldn't have happened without the move that Simon described and all the comrades and friends, screwing the shelves up and all the rest of it. I mean, I remember, I've been a fan of Bookmarks since the mid-1980s, and I remember being brought to the Finsbury Park branch for the first time by my friend and comrade, the late Jane Elderton. And it was a treasure trove, it was fantastic to discover there's a shop just full of ideas and full of books. But when I took over the following year, saw the Battle of Seattle, some of you will remember, and the birth really of what became an era of mass movements, but the anti-capitalist movement, and imagine having a movement called that, was absolutely immense. And it meant that, and we in Bookmarks consciously wanted to put ourselves at the centre of the debates that were generated by that. A whole generation of people getting political, talking about globalisation, talking about the North and the South, talking about the capitalism, about profit, about could the world be different, a new world is possible. These were all phrases that became commonplace in the movement. And we, as it said up there, we also went international. We sold books on a bookstall in minus 12 degrees in Brussels. We sold books at Genoa, you know, when the massive demonstrations. We went to the Florence Social Forum and had a fantastic bookstall there. You know, the sense of actually being part of something massive. And all around the country, me and Kevin Best and Lindy and others, we all went round in the little white van that we used to have, you know, to every big rally, to protest, to demonstrations. There was absolutely so much going on. And I think that we had, I think, the first, but if not the first, maybe the second, live stream link-up. Now they're nothing, we have Zoom meetings and everything else with Noam Chomsky. He was in MIT, we were in a community hall, Dragon Hall round the corner, and the sound went at the last minute and Kevin Best had to hold the phone up to the mic. But nevertheless, you know, the technology, we managed to do it. Chomsky was a real friend to Bookmarks when we were sued for libel by a fascist because a magazine in the shop called him a fascist. Chomsky was one of the people that signed our open letter and was a great supporter. But lots of new authors and books. No Logo was a huge seller now. He came and spoke at Marxism and came and shopped in the Arundhati Roy. I mean, she had a piece in The Guardian even today about what's going on in India. She came into the shop just to buy books, and we then got chatting to her. And George Monbiot and others. Michael Moore, you see the pictures. I mean, to get Michael Moore, when he came over, he'd apparently expressed an interest in being an independent bookshop. I made a big card saying, we are no ordinary bookshop. Put photographs of us on demos with trade unionists and everything else. Took it down to Penguin headquarters where he was doing a press conference and basically doorstepped him after the press conference and said, we are no ordinary bookshop, Michael. Come to Bookmarks. We're a socialist bookshop. And to be fair to him, he read the card, he smiled, he shook my hand and turned to his people and said, see if we can make this happen. And he did. And I know it's a cliche to say that Q was round the block, but anybody who was there, the Q was round the block. And it was absolutely amazing. At one point we weren't doing it quick enough, and he said, we have to have some Fordism here. And he put us all in a massive bear hug. He's a huge man. And said, right, you take the names, you tell me, it means I can talk to the person. And he literally had this production line. And even though all the Penguin, you know, top people, because he was a big author for them, were saying, we must go, Michael, you know, you need to get your food, we want to take you somewhere else. You go, no. He refused to go till the last person in the queue came into the shop, and only then would he leave, shaking all our hands and all the rest of it. So, you know, terrific time, a moment really where Bookmarks was recognised even by, to be honest, the bourgeois publishers as being a place that actually there was an audience for these political ideas, and they came to us for advice. Eric Osborne, what will we do? Come to Bookmarks. All of these people were people that came and wanted to be a part of Bookmarks and what we could bring to the table. And we wanted our politics, socialist politics, revolutionary socialist politics, to be at the centre of those debates. So we stocked all the authors, we stocked all the different people who were writing, but we wanted to make sure that socialist politics was there at the centre. We also wanted it to be a cultural space as well. We had film shows on Friday nights. We had if people know Shirley Collins, you know, who worked with Alan Lomax in America, recording, she came to the shop and talked to us and gave us a most magnificent slideshow. Of course, in the midst of this, then we had 9/11. And really that changed the situation. I mean, we happened to be on a TUC bookstore on the day of it, actually, but that's another story. But the sense of then what that generated, and I'm really pleased to see Jeremy Corbyn has arrived. The anti-war movement was an absolutely massive movement. People thought that the anti-capitalist movement would be crushed by 9/11 and what it meant. But actually what it did was it politicised yet another generation. And only last week we marked the 20-year anniversary of 2 million people marching through London against the Iraq War. It was absolutely magnificent. And it marched a section of it. We didn't all go from one place. We came from different parts of London, marched past the shop. And Alan Ridley and his mate Harry got on the roof of Bookmarks and dropped that huge banner made by Ed Hall, a fantastic banner maker, dropped it from the roof, and we had a lovely friendly neighbour who let us climb through a flat. But that sense, and when we had a bookstore, we had the gazebos in Hyde Park that day. We had to have a system where if you needed a drink of water or to go to the loo, you had to have another Bookmarks person behind you. And then you'd finish selling a book and you'd go, I'm ready. You jump out, they jump in. The queues around the bookstore was absolutely phenomenal. And authors would come by, Gotta Carmi and others, they would be going by, oh, shall I sign a few books? And come and sign books and then wander off into the demo. The sense of being part of something absolutely gigantic. Now, of course, today, just to point out, there was everybody 20 years later is happy to acknowledge that the Iraq War was a big mistake. Of course, today the anti-war movement is much more in a minority over the Ukraine war, but I think that means our analysis about imperialism and everything else, and reading and understanding those ideas, is, to be honest, more important than ever, because we're going against a stream, and Keir Starmer wants to crush people like Jeremy and others who've got a principled view against the war and against militarisation and increased defence spending. And I think the sense of why are we so committed as socialists to books and to ideas and reading? It's not about qualifications, it's not about getting exams, it's not about getting one over on somebody in an argument just for the sake of it. It's about because we want to change the world, don't we? We want to do something to change the conditions that are all around us. And I think I just want to tell one story which I think illustrates it. One day, an elderly man walked into Bookmarks. Andy Ridley was behind the till, and he went up to Andy and said, "Can you recommend me anything new on alienation?" So, without missing a beat, Andy said, "Well, there's nothing new, but the best book you can read in alienation is by Itzhak Sarosh." And he went, "That's me." Itzhak became a really good friend of Bookmarks, and I became a friend of his until he died in 2017. But he was somebody he wrote so many books. He gave one of the books to Bookmarks as a way of raising money for us. And many of his books were highly theoretical, esoteric books. But what was the day that he told me that he cheered the loudest and jumped out of his chair was the Egyptian Revolution. And he saw on Paxman, on Newsnight, Paxman was cross-examining what he said. There was this young woman in Cairo, in Tahrir Square, and Paxman was saying, "But there's no ideology in this revolution, it's just, And he went, "No." She went, no, I'm a revolutionary socialist." And he said he jumped out of his chair with his fist in the air. And I think that for us, isn't it? It's about not ideas for the sake of ideas, not books for the sake of books. So of course we want books that move us, inspire us, make us angry, educate us. We want all of that. But we want to be armed so we can change the world. And the end of that story is quite nice, because in the end, Gigi Abraham from the Revolutionary Socialists, the sister organisation to the SWP, and I was able to introduce them both in person, and Gigi came to speak about the Egyptian Revolution a year later. So that sense, and I mean, Itzhak Sarosh was in Hungary, left Hungary when the Soviets invaded, worked with Lukács. So we're talking about those sense of links, if you like, that go right back to revolutionary times, that I think that the bookshop encapsulates at its best points. It encapsulates keeping that history alive from real struggles, but into future struggles. So anyway, I could go on all night. I'll stop now.
Fantastic, inspiring contribution. Ideas for the struggle. That's what Bookmarks is about, isn't it? And I think, am I right in saying that there is in fact a book either named or certainly set on the day of that fantastic demonstration, isn't there?
Indeed there is, yes. I mean, with a whole history of what went on in the Stop War movement and everything else, yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. And it is great to see so many of the people who've been part of the history of Bookmarks, who've worked at Bookmarks. I've seen Lindy, who I can't remember the last time I saw, Lindy and Neil Smith and so many other people, Rob and so on, who've been part of Bookmarks history. It's fantastic to have you here. And of course, you saw on the film that we were all affected by the pandemic. Bookmarks was affected by the pandemic and had to go online for a long period of time. Again, a measure of the esteem in which this bookshop is held. One of the things I had the privilege of hosting was an online book launch of Amelia Gentleman's brilliant Paul Foote journalism award-winning book, The Windrush Scandal. And when she spoke to me afterwards, she said that it was a fantastic event and how proud she was to have done that and to have had that association with Bookmarks. And that brings me neatly on to our last contributor. Ursula Hawthorne is the current manager of Bookmarks. So, Ursula, do you want to talk about Bookmarks today and in the future? On the floor before we have a little break.
Okay, I hope you can all hear me. I'm going to say the least of everyone here because I've just started. When we come back for the 60th birthday in a bigger venue, I'll have loads to say. Okay, but for now, I just want to say what an honour it is to be the manager of Bookmarks when you sit on a platform with people like this, and also the other managers who are here in the audience, but not up here on the stage with us, who have made Bookmarks the shop that it is today. And I think that when you go and shop in Bookmarks, you have one experience. When you go and work in Bookmarks, it's a very different experience. And I think that, do you know, for those of us who shop there, we take it for granted. When you work there, you really appreciate what the shop is, because so many people come in there and they're finding it for the first time. And they can't believe they come into a shop stuffed full of left-wing political ideas about how we change the world. And for those of us who work there, that is a weekly experience coming in. There are also the people who come in all the time and still also have to tell you that they can't believe they're coming to a shop stuffed full of books full of ideas about how to change the world. And it really is an incredibly uplifting experience to work there for that reason. And I think you know, as Brian said, Bookmarks was affected by the pandemic. We were all affected by the pandemic. Central London has been affected by the pandemic. But you know, how brilliant it is that our 50th birthday falls in this year, where we are actually seeing such a fantastic upturn in class struggle. An upturn we have waited for so long for. And now it is happening. But I think also that this is happening, and is partly is happening because of the environmental catastrophe that we face, because we are really in a situation where the options are running out, and therefore there is a whole new audience out there looking for ideas, looking for socialism, looking to change the world. And so Bookmarks being there right in central London. But not just because we're there in central London. You know, Fergus talked about the mail order. We still do mail order. It's still a huge part of what we do, and that I think that probably makes us very different from other independent bookshops, in that we have a network that covers the whole of not only the UK. We get orders from Canada, from America, from right across Europe, even from Korea and all over, and we send books all around the world to people who want those ideas. And yeah, I don't know what else to say really.
Apart from coming to Bookmarks, buy books, set up a standing order, all that kind of Judith?
Well, I just want to say one thing. Amazon, there's the elephant in the room, isn't it? It cuts prices, it treats its workers like shit, but you can get books cheap and fast. But the difference is they treat a book as a little unit. It could be a can of paint. It doesn't matter what it is, as long as it's a unit selling for profit. If you get your books from Bookmarks, whether it's online or whatever, you know it's different. You know it's something that we're selling because we want to get ideas across, we want to change the world, we want to inspire you, we want you to find out about the world. We don't treat it just as some simple unit, something to sell. So I'd urge you, if you don't have an account, if you in the past get tempted, and it is tempting to get something cheaper and faster on Amazon, you'll get it from Bookmarks, and you'll get it from people who are passionate about their politics and passionate about book selling.
There's just one thing that occurs to me. I try not to mumble on too long. Seeing Roger Huddle there makes me realise that Pete Marsden is not. Now, Pete Marsden set up the publishing side of Bookmarks, and he did it. I don't know how. Probably not many of you now remember the Gone with the Wind poster. Yes. How many people know what the Gone with the Wind poster is? Well, if the person next to you is not told, it's apparently one of the biggest ever selling posters. It was produced in the IS book publisher print shop. And he used the money from that to set up the book service, the bookshop, the book publishers. And I think that's one of the things that we have to remember, that we're not just selling books, we are actually publishing them as well.
Thanks very much. Welcome to Jeremy Corbyn, who's arrived. Also, I noticed that Michael Rosen, the former children's laureate, has arrived. And the Costa Poetry Award-winning poet Hannah Lowe has arrived as well. You will be hearing from all three of them.
My name's Colin Bryce. I'm currently working as the publisher for Bookmarks and feel immensely proud to be a part of this whole thing. Like Judith, I remember first coming across Bookmarks books in the 1980s in Sydney, in Australia, of all places. And we had a little bookshop there in the International Socialists, and I just devoured all the books that Bookmarks published, and just loved them for it. I loved the way in which what was so different about Bookmarks from that time. I remember I was running around trying to find my way into socialist ideas, and you would come across Communist Party bookshops, and there was 2 Communist Party bookshops in Sydney. But you just didn't even know where to start. They just published all the collected works of everything, but you didn't know where to start. What was brilliant about Bookmarks from the beginning is that it was always focused on being accessible to people, talking in people's language, being straightforward, understanding the difficulties and the dilemmas that people were facing. How do you deal with Stalinism? What's the problems with reformism? What are you trying to do in books that were trying to address that? But also very, very proud of things like, for example, I remember Bookmarks published The Ghetto Fights by Marek Edelman. Do you know what I mean? The Warsaw Ghetto, and just being so moved to read that story and read the way in which it was a socialist comrade here, John Rose, who went and met Marek Edelman, found the document in his aunt's sort of attic, and went and got that published in Bookmarks. Is the way that we could do that. It was great. That tradition continues today, and I just wanted to mention one book that we just recently published, which was Sukhdev Reel's book, which I was involved with last year, and we managed to publish it for the 25th anniversary, 25 years since her son Ricky died after a racist attack, and only this week she finally got the Metropolitan Police to announce a new investigation into her case. And she said, when she was interviewed about it, and she was all over the news, she said when she finally met the Metropolitan Police Commissioner and all his team, he said, I've read the book, all my team have read the book, we know what's going on and all that sort of stuff. And that's part of the reason. It's not the only reason. It's because Luke did this campaign with a heart like a lion for 25 years, and all her family and everything the pressure. But I'm so proud of Bookmarks being part of that campaign, being part of those sorts of struggles as it is for so many other things as well, and that we can play a role in that. Thanks. That's all.
Yeah, thanks, comrades. I'll be brief. I mean, I was the manager of the shop when it was attacked by the fascists in 2018. And I think we shouldn't dwell on that attack except to say thank you to Noel Halifax. There he is. Yeah. He was actually in the shop at the time and had to deal with it all, and Senan, who's not here. But what I did want to say was that within a week, we'd responded to that. So it happened on one Saturday. The following Saturday, we met in this room with poets, with playwrights, with activists, and had a fantastic solidarity event. I mean, it was August, so it was hard because Jeremy was on holiday. So was Mike Rosen, actually. They were both on their holidays. But we had a fantastic response from the whole movement. And I just think that is what people have said, how much we feel that the bookshop has become part of the entire workers' movement. And that solidarity goes 2 ways. When you give it, you get it back.
Yeah, hello everyone. My name's Sasha. I worked at Bookmarks when Simon was manager and then when Judith was, and I thank you, Simon, for giving me the job because it was a great time. But I was also, as a result of that, I was also part of the team that saw the transition from Finsbury Park to New Oxford Street. And I'm often kept awake at night worrying about it because I was useless at metalwork as a kid, and I've never done anything since. Useless at woodwork, and then all of a sudden I'm in the back of the back of Bookmarks, like some staccato bike with sparks coming off as I'm cutting those rods and sort of up ladders, putting halogen lamps in. And I'm thinking, my God, if they changed those fuses since, it's going to burn down because Cynic was there with his crassness. But I just want to, we've heard some very, very brilliant positive stories about Bookmarks, and absolutely that's right. The struggle is long and hard, isn't it, comrade, as well? And someone's right to talk about, the last couple of days before Bookmarks opened the doors in a new place and whatever. And I remember we were there, like he says, Neil and Charlie Hoare and all these people, we were there for a very long time, 36 hours without sleep, making sure that those doors were open. I remember we all stood there, lined up, I think it was like 5 minutes to 9 before the doors were opened. I remember John Rees making a speech about, Bookmarks opening into a new chapter, and it's fantastic. The doors opened. And in came our first 2 customers, and they said, have you got Andrew Morton's book on Princess Diana? The struggle goes on, Corbyn.
I'm Josh, I work in a bookshop at the moment, I buy the books, but I won't speak for ages, but I started working in a bookshop in 2019. I remember the interview. I got a call when I was on the way down. I've never actually been to the shop before. When I got there, I was quite amazed to see the shop and the sort of the literature in there. And I think one of the first things I said is that, I've actually heard that there's a climate protest going on. It was the first Fridays for Future student climate strikes. And I was like, if possible, it'd be great to leave a little bit early. I think it's the first time that I've ever thought, if you go to a job interview and say you've got to leave early, the people interviewing you usually don't seem that happy about it. But they actually seem chuffed, and one of the things I love about Bookmarks is that the more that you seem like you want to change the world, if you go into the shop or if you work for the shop, the more they're willing to help you do it. One of the times I was like, I don't know if I need to book off work this week. I really want to go to the Extinction Rebellion occupation of Downing Street. And it was like, great, don't book off, just go down with some books every day. So we set up, there's me and a few comrades going down just part of Extinction Rebellion and things like that. And one day we was camping out, we'd done a bookstall in the daytime, and there was, obviously we was camping, I was getting to the nitty-gritty of it, just 'cause there's probably a few police in the audience, things. But we sat in a tent, and people who were organising it come round, and we got asked if someone could do night patrol. Make sure that no one turned up and tried hauling people out of their tents or whatever, you ring a bell, or whatever the procedure was. And I got volunteered to do the 2 AM one, which was a bit of a nightmare. But we got on with it, and then obviously it comes to the next day, and the general running of things was we'd get up at about 8, go up to the bookstore, go up to the bookshop, which is about a 20-minute walk, get the books, haul them back down, and then set up a stall from about 9:30 in the morning. And obviously speak to as many people, and we did this for about 7 or 8 days. Also, and after doing the night shift, obviously we went to bed somewhere in the road around Trafalgar Square. And then early in the morning we heard the zip going on the tent. And a police officer sticks his head in about 7 o'clock, and he goes, if you don't get out in the next 10 minutes, we're going to arrest you. And I was just hoping that they'd let us stay till 8 so I could have a little lay-in before I had to head up to the bookshop and head back down again. But really, the main thing I want to say is obviously Bookmarks is a fantastic shop, and we've had some really great managers who we've all heard from. It's something I've really been looking forward to, just hearing the history of the shop. But more than that, it's not just the managers. There's a lot of people who work in the shop who go, I'm not talking about myself here, just so you know, but like, I know Noel's got a shout out, we've got Katie, Chris who's been on the bar, been working here a long time. There's a lot of people here in the audience who've worked in the shop. And obviously everyone here who buys from the shop, who's paid for an event to get here as well. Without people like yourselves, Bookmarks couldn't be going as well. So thanks everyone who's come out tonight. Obviously keep supporting the bookshop, open an account if you can. And yeah, hopefully, like Ursula was saying, 50 years time, we'll have a huge event, but hopefully we won't still need to be struggling for the same things we were struggling on when the shop opened. Yeah, thanks everyone for being here.
One is, and I'm sure everybody got the sense of it from the videos and also what all the speakers have been saying, there isn't a single bookshop I know of that has the range, the depth and the intelligence of the kind of book launch events that our bookshop has. It really is quite staggering and extraordinary. I mean, I teach in the university sector, and when my undergraduate students, so when they do see the adverts either online or on leaflets for the kinds of speakers and the book launch events that we have, they are absolutely gobsmacked at it because they don't see it anywhere else. And that really is a significant tribute to not just our organisation and our politics, but also to our comrades who work in the bookshop. And that brings me to the second point. Ursula said that there is a difference between when you come into the bookshop and shop in there, like I do, and when you work in there, which I have never done. And I just want to say this about the comrades who have worked in the bookshop. They work, Simon said that the party had to rely upon unpaid labour to help the shift from Finsbury Park to central London, which we did, and I was a part of that unpaid labour. But we also have comrades who work exceedingly long and anti-social hours at events, in terms of, sort of external events, but also at our own events. These are the comrades, when we are in meetings at Marxisms, at other events, enjoying the meetings, enjoying the speakers, these are the comrades who are staffing the bookstall, who are running around, sort of taking books from one meeting to another meeting across different venues and everything else. And I just want to tell us one story, and I know he's here, Charlie Hall. In 1994, when we defeated Derek Beacon the Nazi, and there was a fantastic anti-Nazi League festival that took place in South London, in Brockville Park. It was absolutely amazing. It happened over the bank holiday weekend that May, which coincided with the NATFI National Conference, which was one of the precursors to UCU, my union right now. There were several of us who were delegates. Charlie volunteered to be the Bookmarks person to go all the way up to Southport, outside of Liverpool, which is where it was. Comrades were enjoying themselves in the park. It was a fantastic day. Everybody was really happy. And people had to go home early because I was driving the car at 4 o'clock the next morning to take us up to Southport. Charlie didn't hesitate to say, yes, I will do this. He didn't stop to think about, I really want to enjoy this A&L festival. And, and what that epitomises is, I think, a huge political characteristic of the comrades that we are so privileged to have work inside Bookmarks for us, because we are the ones who really enjoy that benefit. And I think we can't underestimate how important the work that you guys do inside Bookmarks.
Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy, welcome. I understand you may have to leave, and so I shall, without further ado, I'll invite you to speak to us. Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you. Thanks very much, and lovely to see this place absolutely packed out. And when I came in, I was slightly alarmed. I could see a crowd, I could see a bar, I could see a platform. I thought, my God, Bookmarks is living on, but it's given up on books. I couldn't actually see the books on sale over there. I want to say a big thank you to Bookmarks for achieving 50 years. I want to say how annoyed I am you're not still based in Finsbury Park. And if you care to come back to Finsbury Park, which I consider to be the centre of the known universe, you'll be more than welcome. And Finsbury Park is a very special place to me. I live there as well, so I suppose I'm perhaps more than slightly biased. But it's also a place of huge political interest, in the sense of all the rallies and demonstrations from anti-apartheid, anti-First World War, miners' strike and so much else that took place in Finsbury Park itself. And then just up the road you've got a complementary bookshop in New Beacon Books that was established by the late great John Lowe in the 1960s, and was and is a very important centre for the Afro-Caribbean community, and indeed by their work alone on challenging Haringey's education system in the 1960s and 70s, ended the banding policy which had become and was deeply discriminatory against black children. And so they had that effect and also gave that centre to people to come. And Bookmarks, when it opened, was to me a revelation. To have a bookshop I could go in, it was full of left-wing books. I got fed up with foils. First of all, not having any kind of cataloguing system or anything else, just piles and piles of books all over the place, and a management that was decidedly anti-union and treated the staff appallingly, even though many of the staff were absolutely wonderful people who would do a great deal to help you when you went there. So I was really pleased when Bookmarks opened, and I had a very good relationship, as the staff of that day will know, because I was then the agent for Hornsey Labour Party, and also very active in the Haringey Labour Movement anti-racist, anti-fascist campaign, our local version of the anti-Nazi League, and also in the anti-cuts campaign. But what I don't know if you're yet aware of this, there was an amazing piece of technological advance made by Bookmarks in the 1970s, which was unknown to any other bookshop. They were the only place anywhere in North London that had an electronic stencil maker. Now, this is a very age-divisive remark I'm about to make. There's only people of a certain age will even know what a duplicator is. Yeah, thank you at the back over there. Well, and also, before anybody goes any further, in the Rodeo versus Gestetner debate, I am firmly in the Gestetner camp. They were made in Tottenham. The owner of the company lived in Highbury. Is there any other thing I need to tell you? And for those who are of a more delicate years, that is the younger generation, a duplicator is something that whirs around with a wax stencil on it, and it prints one sheet of paper at a time. They became electrically powered after a while, but I have two hand-operated ones. Both saw service with the 8th Army in North Africa. And they're ready to give service again should there be an electricity cut. What we would do is type out a stencil, or if you're really clever, you could draw on a stencil and produce a leaflet, and you'd produce the leaflets by duplicating, sometimes all night. But, you see, Bookmarks had hit the jackpot. They bought an electronic stencil maker, so you'd put your artwork on one drum, and a sort of camera would zzz all across it as it whirred round, and transfer the image from that drum to the drum with the electronic stencil on it. And the electronic stencil would then be put on a duplicator, and somebody would stand over these machines all night long producing 10,000 leaflets. The kind of thing you can get a message out in 10 seconds these days on social media. But it was a fantastic achievement, and the Bookmarks were incredibly generous to me. They would often stay open late on a Saturday evening to do the last few electronic stencils. So thank you, Bookmarks, for your support, your solidarity, your friendship, and your embracing of new technology without cutting jobs at the same time, which so many others have done. So I want to say thank you to Bookmarks for all of that. But it's also a bookshop that is different to any other shop. It is about bringing people in. It is about exciting people. It is about the imagination that goes with it. And if you just walk along the stall we've got over there, you see the variety of books that are there and the huge variety that is in the shop itself. And books do open people's minds. Absolutely no question about that. I was, keep this to yourself in case any Daily Mail reporters here, I was monumentally unsuccessful in all academic departments in school. But two things I enjoyed doing. One was volunteering in the school library, and the other was going to the local library and looking at atlases and books and so on. And reading a lot. I've always loved reading a great deal, but the Daily Express apparently has said I've never read a book in my life, which I think is the grossest slur that's ever been thrown at me. All the rest of it, that's just the pits, actually. And books do open the mind. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a deeply intellectual, carefully researched political tone. It can be a novel, it can be a description, it can be all sorts of things. When I was at school, I became interested in Russian history and the era of revolution from the 1860s onwards. And, you know, when you're sort of 15 or 16, it's quite hard to take all that in. But the book that really spoke to me and spoke for me was John Reed, 10 Days That Shook the World. Because it was human, it was personal, and it was a story about lives of people, the stress, the excitement, the fear, and so on. And he wrote an equivalent book about the Mexican Revolution, which is less well known, but is equally absolutely brilliant, in which he traces the way in which the Mexican Revolution swept across the north of the country. And so when a bookshop produces books like this and gets them out there, so when people come in, you've got a very difficult balancing act running a bookshop. You don't want to force yourself on the customer and say, you really need to buy this, you need to buy that, you need to buy the other. And by the way, I'll give you a voucher for your next purchase. But you also want to be able to be informative, helpful, and encourage them to be there. It's quite a difficult balancing act, because you want, obviously, the people to come back. And that is what Bookmarks is about and what it does. And I want to say a huge thank you for that. But also the way in which it reaches out to literature in so many other ways. The novels that it gives space to, from people from West Africa, from South Asia, from Latin America, and the way it gives the variety of books that are published all over the world the space to be bought and to be read. And so you then ask yourself some questions about history. Now, Black Lives Matter was and is a brilliant movement. And what it did was immediately questioned the colonial curriculum, immediately questioned the way in which we look at and study history. And that, to me, is the most important issue of our times. Because without realising it, the way our children in school are taught history actually has a massive impact on their social attitudes. Because the history, the time I was in school, we taught was one essentially of European supremacy, but particularly of British supremacy around the world. That somehow or other, we were better than the rest of the world, and all inventions, all music, all art was all seen through the prism of Europe and European civilizations. Now, I think it's a fantastic things to read, understand, and know about Europe, and I do personally love a lot of European classical music. But that doesn't mean that Europe owns the world. It doesn't mean European culture has to own the whole world. It has to be that understanding of colonial history. And there was a time when it was very hard to find any books that were any sort of alternative. And Walter Rodney's book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, is to me one of the most powerful books of an analysis of history. I lived in the 1960s in Jamaica. I was a volunteer in Jamaica. I was probably a very bad volunteer, probably not very good at what I was supposed to be doing. I was meant to be teaching, but I learnt a great deal when I was there. And Walter Rodney arrived in Jamaica. He'd been at a Black Writers' Conference in Canada, and he wanted to go to the University of the West Indies to give a talk essentially about his ideas on history and analysis of it. And the government of Jamaica got into incredible panic, and the Prime Minister announced, why should we be studying Marx when he didn't know that there would be a man on the moon by 1969? It puzzled me at the time, and the statement has puzzled me ever since. But he took this as a cue to say that Walter Rodney was wrong, who had said nothing about Karl Marx or Men on the Moon, actually. And they banned Rodney from speaking. They banned him from speaking in Jamaica, in the Caribbean, about African history. And he was escorted to the airport and thrown out of the country. This would be 1968, I guess, around then. It was outrageous. The response was, I just thought here, this is the response and the power of words. Thousands of young people who had never read any of his works, probably didn't know too much about him, were just so angry at the idea that a black writer who had been at a Black Writers' Congress would be thrown out of the country because of his ideas. And so there were demonstrations and riots and so on immediately. And that is the power of ideas that are picked up by people, even those that don't read the book themselves. And so it's that analysis of history. And over there, I'm very pleased to see on the stall, is Newsinger's work on the British Empire and the brutality of that. I read it a few months ago. I read it from cover to cover. Every night I would read as many pages as I could, sometimes till 2 in the morning I was reading it, which is not a good idea when you've got to start work at 8, but there you go. And it is an amazing piece of work because it challenges so much of the conventions and exposes the hypocrisy and the lies surrounding so much of what went on in the British Empire. I'm not saying I wasn't unaware of all this. Absolutely was, but I just think the way it's been put together is incredible. And so I want to say thank you to Bookmarks for giving the space, the time, and so on for so many, and to give space and time for poetry, not just my great friend here, Mr. Rosen, sir, but also other poets. And at the moment, Len McCluskey and I, Maxine Peake and some others, and you, are putting together a book of our favourite poems and why they are our favourite poems. I thought this book was going to be dead easy and dead simple. My God, when you sit down and try and choose 15 poems of all the hundreds and thousands there are, it's a total nightmare. Don't do it, is my advice. Just don't do it. Just read the poems and enjoy them. So I hope you enjoy that book when it comes out, which will be fairly near ahead of us in the future. I just want to finish with this thought. Today, I was in Liverpool, and I went with Wayman and Lewis and Ollie from my office. We went to the anti-fascist demonstration in Liverpool, and I had to explain to them on the train journey the intricacies of the duplicator and the electronic stencils. So they're now complete experts on it, and Lewis will be writing a pamphlet for it on the importance in history of the electronic stencil. A good number of people came out of absolute horror of what was going on in Knowsley, and also the demonstrations that took place today in Oxford. I believe there were some in Scotland, and also in Rotherham today. The fascists are out. They are out, and they are threatening desperate refugees who are put into hostels where they're grossly exploited by Serco, abused by the Home Office, and left in desperation and poverty, and refused the right to work despite there being a massive shortage of skills in just about every industry or service in this country. Many of those people could help to fulfill those gaps. And the abuse they receive is then across Europe as well. And last month I went to Calais with Belle Rivero-Addy and some others, and I've been to Calais before when the jungle camp was there. The situation now is actually worse, because the camp, for all its shortcomings, and there were many, at least gave a sense of solidarity and community to people. Now it is itinerant groups of refugees from Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Libya, Sudan, Eritrea, Senegal, many, many countries, just basically roaming around trying to survive, or to get across the channel, or to go somewhere else. and they're harassed by the police, harassed by the local fascists. The only support mechanism is the Catholic Church Centre and the volunteer-run kitchen, which provides food and donates clothing and so on to them. Nobody willingly would get in a leaky old dinghy to try and cross the channel. So none of us here have got any time for people traffickers, obviously, but nobody would put themselves in that kind of danger unless you're absolutely desperate. So can't we just have a humanitarian approach to it? And then we sort of draw the parallels, and we always, on the left, always look for historical parallels of what we're doing. Is this the 1920s when the Nazis were rising in Germany? And sadly, many social democrats in Germany thought you could just ignore the Nazis because they were brutal, illiterate, stupid, nasty, and would eventually go away. They didn't. They stayed and murdered 6 million. Is it the pre-First World War time when a series of interlocking, often secret mutual defence agreements convulsed the world into a war in less than a month from somebody being killed in Sarajevo? Is it a repeat of the 1930s after the defeat of the general strike and the desperation of the poorest people in this country? Is it a repeat of the Vietnam War protests? Is it a repeat of the miners' strike? Is it my parents' generation and their solidarity with the Spanish Civil War? And so on. We're always looking for, that was the historical moment, this is the parallel, this is what's happening now. Actually, it's none of them. It's a different time. The optimist in me, and I'm basically a very optimistic person, in my line of work you have to be, is that the disputes of the teachers, of the postal workers, of the railway workers, of the civil servants, and many other private sector disputes that particularly the United Union's been involved with, and the growth of newer unions that are organising gig workers and others, is a fundamental change. I've been on dozens and dozens of picket lines and rallies and meetings all over the country over the past years, well, all my life really, and there was a time when if you turned up an industrial dispute and said, I'm here to express solidarity with you, and started talking about refugee rights, about housing, about environmental needs, and about other workers who were not in unions but we felt ought to be, people would have said, hang on, no, we're not doing that. We're here for our dispute. It does not happen like that now. That sense of solidarity is there, and that sense of consciousness and understanding is there, and that's something that I feel is the way forward. So the strength of all these movements and the big demonstrations that are going to be held on, well, February 28th and then moving on to March the 15th are going to make a very big difference. But don't underestimate the power of the far right, egged on by our media, to essentially throw abuse at people, asylum seekers and others who are desperate, so they can be the whipping people for those media. So it is a question of solidarity, and sometimes having to have quite robust conversations with people about the importance of solidarity across all of the piece. Because if you just listen to our mainstream media, you'd think the reason the nurses are underpaid is because the train drivers are on a good salary. It's obviously the fault of every train driver that the government refuses to pay nurses properly. I mean, the argument is such nonsense and such bunkum, it's hardly worth engaging with. But unfortunately, you do have to engage with it and say the fundamental problem is inequality, is the growth of billionaires, is the privatisation of our public services, is the theft of our electricity, our gas, our water by the private sector away from the public. So it is about always throwing those arguments in. And absolutely the last thing I want to say is this is about the media. All of us in this room, I'm sure, have got a mobile phone. All of us in 1 second can find out quite a lot of information you might need. All of us use social media quite a lot, and indeed I use it a great deal. I'm very grateful for many people that help with social media and getting a message across. You can get a message out there. But don't be totally fooled by it, because the algorithms are at work.
Yeah.
The algorithms direct you in a certain way all the time. So you end up reading the news somebody thinks you ought to read, or watching on YouTube the film somebody thinks you ought to read. For some reason, YouTube have got it into their head that my only interest in life is disused railway lines and canals. So I get lots of stuff about disused railway lines and canals that need to be reopened. I want the disused railway lines reopened, I want the canals reopened, I absolutely do. And I support it and I'll do everything for it, but it's not my only interest. That's what I would say. And so that at one level is sort of quite amusing. But think of that on a more global scale. Think of the way in which the Indian government closed down all social media at a point when the Indian farmers were moving on to success. Think of the way in which the social media, internet, mobile phones and so on is regularly closed down in places where big demonstrations go on. And then look at the legislation that's now being put through in Britain on assembly, on borders and nationality, and on the right to strike that's going on. We're moving into a period when a combination of information, surveillance and high technology is in danger of becoming extremely repressive. Our difference is we do things together and ideas. The danger is that information only coming through social media is often individual, it's often isolating, and keyboard warriors late at night that send me abusive messages. I kind of think, why is somebody at 2 o'clock in the morning writing this crap? You know, what's in their heads? Why are they doing it? And you sort of think, well, somebody's angry about something, so they decide to send something like that. And so at the same time as giving us the opportunities, it's also disempowering of many people. So I've gone on too long. I want to finish with this and say a huge thank you to Bookmarks and all the other bookshops. And I'm delighted that there's more books being published now than ever in this country. Therefore, assumingly, people are reading more than ever. And books challenge, broaden and open the mind. And if we didn't have independent bookshops that give us the space to go in and talk about it, because you can't go into an Amazon warehouse and have a chat about books. It does not work like that. But you've got Bookmarks, you've got New Beacon, you've got numbers of other books, Houseman's and so on, around where you can go and have those conversations. So Bookmarks plus 50, thank you very much. Come back to Finsbury Park if you can, and thank you very much for inviting me today.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation. Inspirational words as ever. Jeremy, you mentioned Black Lives Matter, which was, of course, through the period of the pandemic, the one fantastic, inspirational eruption out onto the streets that we saw in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd, and that encouraged people to think about how to challenge racism. Of course, one of the great figures of the fight against racism was Dr. Martin Luther King, who had and spoke in 1963 at the March on Washington about the dream that he had. What an indictment that we have a Home Secretary whose dream is to send asylum seekers on planes to Rwanda. What an absolute disgrace that we have that situation. Jeremy, you also mentioned, both at the beginning and at the end, you mentioned New Beacon Books, which was the original publisher, I think I'm right in saying, of a seminal work, How the West Indian Child is Made Educationally Subnormal in the British School System, a book which exposed the scandal of the treatment of the... It's just been republished. It has just been republished. What I was going to say is this, is that 30 years after the original publication, I had the immense privilege with Bookmarks of republishing, because it was out of print at that time, and Paul Mackney, who was the General Secretary of the College Lecturers Union, he talked about how many committed, dedicated anti-racist lecturers wanted to get hold of it, couldn't because it was out of print, and that he had to literally keep photocopying it at NATFE headquarters so that they had it, and it was actually on the back of a whole series of conferences organised by your great friend and comrade Diane Abbott, looking at the scandal of the schooling of black children, that it was decided that Bookmarks should republish and reprint How the West Indian Child is Made Educationally Subnormal, and we did so within a book that I had the pleasure and privilege of editing called Tell It Like It Is, How Our Schools Fail Black Children. So that is an indication of how, you know, those linkages and connections and the importance of radical bookshops and publications is so important. So thank you very much for that contribution. We're going to move on now. Most of the second half is going to take a slightly different format with some poems and a bit of music and so on. I'm going to start by turning to Roger Huddle. Roger, who should be known to, I'm sure is known to so many of you, as one of the founding members of the inspirational Rock Against Racism movement in the 1970s. So Roger's going to, I think, read some poetry to us, but we're also going to talk a little bit about Redwords, which is a cultural offshoot of Bookmarks. And Roger, I actually have to thank you as well, because way back I wrote a little article to commemorate, I think it was the 60th birthday, what would have been the 60th birthday of the great reggae artist Bob Marley. And on the back of that, Roger kept badgering me to write a little Redwords book. I kept putting him off, but then eventually I reread the article that I'd written, realised that there were so many mistakes in it that I thought I'd better go and write the book to try and correct what I'd done, and it was because of that that I wrote this little pamphlet that I'm grateful to Roger for. But Roger, coming on to Redwords, tell us a little bit about what the thinking was behind Redwords, how it came about.
Okay, yeah. Is this working? Yeah, okay. Redwords started actually 33 years ago, so we're only 17 years behind Bookmarks. Just say quickly, when I first started at the Socialist Worker print shop at Cotton's Gardens, you used to have to go through the book room to get to the roof where the toilet was. So that's the way I got trapped into that bookshop. Then there was at Finsbury Park, a wonderful bookshop. There, Pete Marsden, who Fergus mentioned earlier. Pete Marsden wasn't a revolutionary, but he was a really radical and keen sub-editor, journalist, come writer. And he started out, he wanted to start Bookmarks publishing, but we needed money. We used to be Pluto Press, but Pluto were drifting away from our politics. And I mean, I just quickly say, we sold 130,000 posters of the, I'll give you the world, the Reagan Thatcher one. Hundreds, thousands of the badges, Stuff the Jubilee, and what was the other one? Down with Miserableism, and with a little picture of Lenin reading Socialist Worker. So all this money helped us get going. Redwords was Pete Marsden, myself, and Paul Foote. We wanted some kind of way, some kind of publishing. Bookmarks, quite rightly, was concerned with producing political books to fit the struggle at that time. We wanted to have a cultural input. We wanted history, we wanted poetry, we wanted the novel, and we wanted to look at the cultural elements. And the first book we published in 1991 was the Peter Lowe poems of Percy Bysshe Shelley. And it was also important because it included his essay on reformism. And it was part and parcel of the SWP come Paul Foote's push for a re-establishment of Percy Bysshe Shelley as the great revolutionary poet. And the second book we published was Literature and Revolution by Leon Trotsky. So I think in the first two books we put our flag, we nailed our intentions. We've always had a sort of a dodgy relationship with Bookmarks. I mean, I usually have to beg to get any money to put a book out, but by and large we succeed in the end. I mean, and We've done a lot of books. We started in English history. We've done the Chartist, and we've done the Union upheaval. Me and Mike have done 2 books on William Morris's poetry, and also the only first publication in English on its own of William Morris's Pilgrims of Hope, which is his poem, long time about the Paris Commune, and also his chants for socialists. So yeah, I mean that's what we've done. Bob Marley. I've done 2 books on C.L.R. James. The bestsellers have been wonderful Judith's book on Dutiful Daughters, and during the lockdown, and so that's basically what we do. Red Word is about producing books that are from the socialist side of our argument.
Fantastic. And talking of culture, Roger, I think we're going to read a poem for us.
I'm going to read a poem, yeah. Right. We haven't published any poems yet, but I'm trying to get... Does anybody know Manjit in Nottingham? Yeah.
Who published that? That was you, wasn't it?
I'm desperately trying to get Manjit.
Who published that, Roger?
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
I'm desperately trying to get Manjit to do a book of Manjit's poetry. Anybody here able to give me a revolutionary portrait of Langston Hughes, I'll also be very happy with. And also I've been promised over and over of all kinds of books, but Wayman has always promised me a book, and it hasn't turned up yet. But anyway, okay, I'm going to do a quick poem. This goes in and out like a yo-yo. Is it in or out?
I don't know if this one's better.
Okay, I'm going to do the poem that I wrote celebrating the 30th anniversary of Rock Against Racism, and then I now dedicate it to Walthamstow, where I live and born and live, because we kicked the arse of the EDL in 2012. This is called Under Heavy Manners. They came riding on austerity, racism their filthy cry. We came together, moved by music from our community. We came together in one heartbeat against the Nazi, feet tapping in a different tune. You know, we came together, rhyming urgent time, beating of drums from white, Asian and black. Where 2 sevens clashed, we stood up to fight. 2-tone chanted from the sound system stack, a rhythmic dub attack upon city streets against a crisis rampant. No jobs, no fun, no future. National Front taking up the slack, feeding off despair of the powerless and despondent. Labour has signed a social contract, workers got sacked, hopes and dreams got hijacked. National Front blaming the blacks, feeding on despair. The National Front was banging at the door, blood on their hands, barbed wire behind their eyes, desiring burning flesh, to make right their hatred of all other, to quench their fear of the future. We came together, one love, one struggle, finding unity on the dance floor, reggae and punk, tearing loose, cracking taboos and breaking rules, rocking against racism and their dirty, rotten system, rocking on the baseline, marching to the front line, human voice raised in anger and jubilation, argument and muscle and rhythm, to put the Nazi under heavy manners. All you tribal dancers, keep true to your part. Keep the real, keep the music in your heart. All you cultural warriors, step forward. One Walthamstow under a groove to dance away all of our restrictions. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that, Robin. And I should say, by the way, that fantastic demonstration gets an honourable mention in Stormzy's new album, if people haven't heard it. It certainly does. Moving straight along, because time is tight, and next person who's going to read some poetry to us is Judy Cox. Judy.
of course, I'm a total fraud up here this evening because I've never published a poem and I've never led the Labour Party. But there's time. So the reason I'm here is because Roger here cannot imagine having a gathering of radical socialists in London without a mention of William Blake, because it just isn't possible to envisage such a thing. So, and it's entirely appropriate because actually William Blake was an illustrator of books, a writer of books, a printer of books, a publisher of books, a would-be seller of books, but he didn't do quite so well at that one. But he did try, and he was immersed in London's radical book-selling and book-publishing culture. And at one point he wrote this: "Reader, lover of books, speaks in thunder and in fire, thunder of thought and flames of fierce desire." So that's the next logo for Bookmarks, the book-loving, thunder of thought and flames of fierce desire. So this evening I am going to talk about William Blake, because one of the Red Word books that Roger did publish 30 years ago now is my little book on William Blake. So we're here to talk about him very briefly. And yes, William Blake was a mystic. Yes, he was a prophet. Yes, he was obscure and difficult. But above all else, he was the poet of the marginalised, of the oppressed, of the chimney sweep, of the teenage sex worker, of the orphan, of the slave. He was their advocate. He was the poet who, above all else, was the scourge of tyranny and oppression. So the first poem I want to read is, I chose London because we're in London. It's very appropriate, and it was written in 1794, when the French Revolution was at its height, but also there was a second war being waged by the ruling class against us through appalling tyrannical laws and bans on meetings and all the things that they like to do when they feel a bit threatened. So 1794 was also the year that the leaders of the radical movement in Britain were put on trial for treason. And if you got found guilty of treason then, you were hung, drawn and quartered. So it wasn't something to be done lightly. So Blake's poem is about that situation of oppression and how it can affect you internally, as well as all the institutions that oppress you externally. And he uses the word charter. So just to explain briefly that the charter was a deed given by the king to companies like the East India Company to carry out their trade. The water supply in London was in private hands. It was fearfully expensive and thoroughly disgusting, so there was a big campaign about water, plus so change. Again, another theme of privatised resources. So, London. I wander through each charted street, near where the charted Thames does flow, and mark in every face I meet marks of weakness and marks of woe. I'm just checking if there's any marks of weakness or woe. In every cry of every man, in every infant's cry of fear, in every voice, in every band, the mind-forged manacles I hear, which is a fantastic phrase for describing what oppression can do to us. How the chimney sweepers cry, every blackening church appalls, and the hapless soldier's sigh runs in blood down palace walls. But most through midnight streets I hear how the youthful harlot's curse blasts the newborn infant's tear and blights with plagues the marriage hearse. So the church is rotten because it turns a blind eye to the chimney sweep and the oppression of children. The palace survives on the blood of soldiers, and the oppression of women, the discrimination, the hypocrisy around sexuality turns something that should be joyful and life-affirming into a plague and into a hearse. And that's his vision of a society under tyranny. Now, 10 years later, in 1804, he wrote Jerusalem, which is part of a longer poem dedicated to Milton, who was also a revolutionary, but that's another story. We haven't got time to go into it. But I wanted to talk about Jerusalem because you might know Jerusalem. Who's heard Jerusalem? The second national anthem, beloved of rugby players, women's institutes, even Tory party conferences. They dare to stand up and sing Jerusalem because they think they have recruited William Blake, the great the advocate of the oppressed, a man who loathed tyranny, who loathed nationalism, who loathed war. They think they've recruited him to their idea that somehow England is special. Going back to what Jeremy said, we are the chosen people. If Jesus was going to wander anywhere except Palestine, of course he would choose England, because we are such a unique and amazing country. So I'm going to read it more in the spirit in which I believe Blake intended it, with a degree of incredulity that anybody could think that our dark satanic bills could be the home for God or Jesus to visit, and what we need to do about it. And did those feet in ancient time walk upon England's mountains green? Was the holy Lamb of God on England's pleasant pastures seen? Did the countenance divine shine forth upon our clouded hills? Was Jerusalem builded here, amongst these dark satanic mills? And I think Blake is saying, no, no, no. And so what is he going to do about it? And here he calls for this kind of flaming incendiary armoury of weapons, not to fight the French, not to fight the Spanish, but to fight for a better world of Jerusalem. Bring me my bow of burning gold. Bring me my arrow of desire. Bring me my spear. O clouds unfold. Bring me my chariot of fire. So he's got this incredible weaponry, and now he makes a pledge. And I think it's a pledge we should all try and make tonight. I will not cease my mental fight, nor shall my sword sleep in my hand, till we have built Jerusalem in England's green and pleasant land. When we tear down the dark satanic mills, then we can rebuild a society of harmony with nature and so on. But it's going to take a ceaseless mental fight, and Bookmarks is obviously part of that ceaseless mental fight.
Brilliantly read, Judy. Thank you so much for that. That was fantastic. We're going to now have a brief musical interlude. As you can see, Russ Chandler is ready. Russ, the floor's yours.
Thank you. I'm not going to use the microphone. I'm going to attempt to project. I wanted to say something which hasn't been said so far, which is that the publication arm of Bookmarks enables ordinary activists to have a voice. I was interested in the Peekskill riots, a pair of riots that happened in 1949 in New York State, when a left-wing music event was attacked by fascists. And a friend of mine said, that's not a very well-known story, you should write it up. So I took it to Colin, and I took it to Roger. Roger put it onto Red Words, and with incredible patience and support from the pair of them, not only was I able to walk into Bookmarks and see on the main display my little book next to Greta Thunberg's, but more seriously, as an ordinary activist, I was able to make a little tiny contribution to the history and the understanding of fascism and link it up with the current struggles. I wouldn't have been able to do that from Faber and Faber. I'm going to sing the song that inspired it. It was written by Pete Seeger. The name of the song is the name of my book, Hold the Line. It's got a chorus you can join in with too. Let me tell you the story of a line that was held. Many brave men and women whose courage we know well. As we held the line at Peekskill on that long September day, we will hold the line forever till their people have their say. Hold the line, hold the line. As we held the line at Peekskill, we will hold it everywhere. Hold the line, yeah, hold the line. We will hold the line forever till there's freedom everywhere. That's your bit. Sing it next time it comes around. There was music, there was singing, people listened everywhere. The people were all smiling, they were happy to be there. Along the road behind us, the fascists waited there. but their curses could not drown out the music in the air. The grounds were all surrounded by a band of gallant men. Shoulder to shoulder, no fascist could get in. The music of the people was heard for miles around, safeguarded by the workers. Their courage made us proud. Here we go. Hold the line, hold the line. As we held the line at Peekskill, we will hold it everywhere. Hold the line, hold the line. We will hold the line forever till there's freedom everywhere. Well, the music was all over and we started to go home. We did not know the trouble and the pain that was to come. We got into our buses and drove out through the gate and met the gangster police, their faces split with hate. Then without any warning, the rocks began to come. The cops and troopers laughed to see the damage that was done. They drove us through a gauntlet to their everlasting shame, and the cowards who attacked us, damnation to their name. Here we go. Hold the line, hold the line. As we held the line at Peekskill, we will hold it everywhere. Hold the line, hold the line. We will hold the line forever till there's freedom everywhere. All across the nation, the people heard the news. They marvelled at the concert and we knew we hadn't lost. We shed our blood at Peekskill that long September day, but we beat back the fascists and we'll do it once again. Hold the line, hold the line. As we held the line at Peekskill, we will hold it everywhere. Hold the line, hold the line. We will hold the line forever till there's freedom everywhere. Last time, hold the line, hold the line. We will hold the line for Peekskill, we will hold it everywhere. Hold the line, yeah, hold the line. We will hold the line forever till there's freedom everywhere. Right. I'd like to set this tune into a folk song that I collected. I collected it in Hoe Street, Walthamstow, outside the Rosen Crown pub 10 years ago, on the day when 5,000 ordinary Walthamstonians turned out and sent the Nazi EDL packing out of town. I've since heard it sung in Coventry, in Liverpool, in Luton. It was sung today in Rotherham, when 500 anti-fascists turned up and got rid of 80 nasty little bastards who were attacking a refugee hotel. And it'd be great if you sung it with me. We are black, white, Muslim and we're Jew. We are black, white, Muslim and we're Jew. We are black, white, Muslim, black, white, Muslim, black, white, Muslim and we're Jew. We are black, white, Muslim and we're Jew. We are black, white, Muslim and we're Jew. We are black, white, Muslim, black, white, Muslim, black, white, Muslim, and we're Jew, and we're gay, and there are many, many more of us than you. There are many, many more of us than you. There are many, many more, many, many more, many, many more of us than you. Come on, sing it with me. There are many, many more of us than you. And there are many, many more of us than you. There are many, many more, many, many more, many, many more of us than you.
Tara in the first half mentioned the fantastic 150,000 strong Brockwell Park Carnival that took place after we defeated Beacon in the 1990s. Now, I think I'm right in saying that the front cover, am I right about this, Hannah? The front cover photograph of the Costa Award-winning poetry book, The Kids That She Wrote, has a photograph of some of the young people who were on that demonstration, at that demonstration, and at that carnival. So it is an immense pleasure to invite Hannah Lowe to join us this evening. Hannah, I think you're going to read 2 or 3 of your poems.
Yeah, I'll read 3.
Off you go then, the floor is yours.
And it's great to be here. I'm so pleased to be invited. After the book won Costa, I had an email from a Tory politician saying that he was reading this book slowly, savouring each poem one a day in his lunch hour. And I just thought, it's not for you. That's how nice it is to be here. And I thought I would read a poem. The book is, a lot of the poems are about my time as a teacher, but there's a whole section that's about my time as a learner. I went to a very traditional secondary school, wasn't allowed into the sixth form, so I got packed off to Barking College where I did my A-levels, and there I encountered the most radical teachers. The book's dedicated to John Toolan, my English teacher, and the first book he gave to us was Ntozake Shange's For Coloured Girls Who Have Considered Suicide When the Rainbow Is Enough. It's a choreo poem set to dance about black women's experiences in America. And I think I probably couldn't have articulated this then, but at that time I was able to see how the critique that Shange was giving of patriarchy and of racism, like I could see the parallels and the tangents with, say, the experiences of my young black girlfriends in London, also with my father, who was Afro-Chinese and had grown up in colonial Jamaica, with his experiences and my own experiences as a woman. And that is the power, I think, of literature. And if you know the poem, you'll know that even by today's standards, it looks pretty experimental. It's written with black American vernacular and lots of phonetic spelling. So I'll read that to you first, dedicated to John, For Coloured Girls Who Have Considered Suicide. Our vows were as flat as the dead fish that floated in Dagenham docks, but still John made us recite these lines meant for black women who said, I have poems, big thighs, little tits, which made us blush as our estuary tongues went tripping over cuz and enough, and the slashes the poet scattered over her page. And the whole bloody thing might well have been staged on another planet, compared to Essex and my pals, whose mums served up school dinners, whose dads worked nights at Ford's. We could just make out the half-rubbed words of last year's kids: discourse, nationhood. And soon I burrowed in my own new terms: hegemony, resistance, sisterhood. Barking College that I met Eve Light and Madeline Core, some of you may know, who were in the SWP at the time, and they were the first kind of politically active young people that I'd met, and they organised the coach down to Brockwell Park for the rally, and they also organised a coach down to Welling to the demonstration to shut down the B&P bookshop. I'm sure many of you were there, and it was my first political protest. When I was trying to remember the poems, it was a long time ago in my memory. I was 16. I was watching old news, clips from YouTube, and I realised, the kind of the contested narrative around that historical moment. And I guess not that I'm likening myself to Shelley, but the idea of poets being the unofficial legislators, and the poem being the place where you can say your truth. That's really important to me. So, Welling. On the news that night, they called us violent youth. But what I remember is the green cord jacket I was wearing, pulled from a bargain bin that morning, and a busload of us singing our way down south, the yellow placards like a bobbing sea of lollipops, A beautiful man with dreadlocks, studs in his chin, and us on the front line, marching and chanting, until the chanting suddenly stopped. Then one voice shouted, "Police protect the Nazis." The police like a wall of giant flies, their graceful white horses. Then silence. No moment in my life do I remember quieter. Before the charges, the bricks, the screams, two boys with gashed heads running together, that animal smell, red smoke, blood on my sleeves. I'll finish with something a little lighter from the sequence about my time as a teacher. I was an English literature teacher. There's colleagues of mine in this room at City and Islington College for 10 years. And, very politically active, sixth form college, an amazing place to work. I didn't have a degree in English literature. I knew nothing of the canon when I started teaching. I was 22, not that much older than my students, and I often found myself getting caught out. I was like one step ahead. Teachers in the room might be nodding, you may know that feeling. But this poem is also about just, cultural capital. If you haven't grown up in the kind of family that would know certain things, you can train yourself and plan, but you might always just be a little step behind. I'm sure the learned audience know that the name of the restoration, Diary of Samuel Pepys, is not spelt like what it sounds. But I didn't know that. And at the time the poem is set, we just moved to Islington, and we were getting sort of students from a different background as well from previously, and that's the context. Pepys. The posh girls came and took a corner table, all lip gloss and ribbony hair, each with a fan of starry GCSEs, a summer of youth hostels in Europe behind them, and the future wide open to them like a rainbow parasol, or so I thought. It was restoration comedies, and I was reading the class an essay, and though I'd seen his name, I'd never heard it. Pepys, I said it, Pepys, over and over, until one girl spoke up. "Do you mean Pepys?" she said, her voice pulled taut as a noose, as if I were the girl and she the teacher. And what could I have said? I read on, Pepys, Pepys, Pepys. Cool as the trickster, ridiculous as the fool.
That was fantastic, Hannah. Thank you so much, and congratulations again on a well-deserved award. Coming towards the end of the evening, so last but by no means least is somebody who I'm sure many of us will have read or listened to some of Michael's poetry, some of Michael's books and so on. I'm looking forward to introducing my 2-year-old daughter to some of Michael's work. The 2007-2009 Children's Laureate, is that right?
Yeah.
Michael Rosen.
I'm one of the people in the room who predates Bookmarks. I do remember actually arriving in Finsbury Park, so where were you before then? Maybe Fergus knows, but I do actually remember. I remember going in there and Tammy worked there, didn't she? Let's big tribute to Tammy. So I've been in and out of Bookmarks for many years, and many thanks to for you selling my books, but also obviously selling all the wonderful books we've heard about this evening, and also publishing my books, which has been very kind of you too. Roger gave me marching orders, as he does, as you know, those of you who know Roger. He told me what I should be doing this evening. I had to talk about tradition, which is good. He said, we've all got tradition, so anyway, so I will get to that. But Jeremy reminded us about social media. And some of you may know that every day I write letters from Boris. And In fact, Bookmarks was in fact selling the book of the letters up until fairly recently. The book is called St Pancras Defendat Me, the Boris letters. And in fact, there is a new volume that is going to be coming out fairly soon that's called Farce Majeure. So I thought I'd start this evening with some of the ones I've just been writing in the last few days, just to cheer us up in case we feel shitty. Okay, so Dear Mog, he writes to Rees Mogg quite often. Dear Mog, something has to be done about Carol Voldemort. Right, the running theme is that Boris doesn't get anything right, least of all his Latin, just in case people... She's getting a vast acreage of space to do down people trying to earn an honest penny through supporting our great party. She is a Delilah forcing Samsung to pull the pillars down. And the motto signing off, Corpus Agatha Christie, Boris. Dear Mog, hacks are sniffing out my orchestral manoeuvres in the park. As Sunak falters over this Northern Ireland Interpol deal, I will strike like Arcala the Snake from Elgar's Jungle Book. Our leaders are Romulus and Remus, suckling the EU dwarf. Hernia in tuba. Boris. Dear Matt Talk-Cock, I watched you on Good Morning Britain this morning, really doing a good job for us, blathering away about nothing, coming over as a psychopath but nice with it, which is exactly the combo we need at the moment. Luca Euphoria, Boris. Dear Mog, worst performing economy, the wokerati will try to blame me, but it can hardly be my fault as I know zero minus zero about economics. Beyond what Philonius says to Hamlet, neither a borrower nor a lender be. Polyphila con Pomodoro. Dear Mog, Labour are 200% ahead in the polls. It's a matter of days before our party will turn to me to pull it out of the drum mills. Just as Claudius wages whether Hamlet will beat Mercutio in the wrestling, I bet you we'll lose unless I'm leader, cogito ergo plum. Any more? Do you want more? Dear Mog, my visit to Ukraine is being acclaimed because people admire my military acumen. As I tell Zelensky, remember the Rolling Stones, the long and winding road. I dread to think what might have happened if Jeremy Paxman had won in 2019. Stew in Pyrex, Boris. Dear Mog, I'm going full-on bellicose now. There never has been a time when flag-waving and sabre-rattling didn't drum up support, especially amongst people who are not going to be killed. And I come up covered in posies. I remember Addle's Trot by Wordsworth. Jingo bingo, Boris. Dear Rob, look like you may be in the mixer with these bullying allegations. That's Mr. Raab, you know, Raab. The basic principle should be followed. Deny everything right up to the moment that it's obvious you're lying. Worked for Sophocles, he denied he murdered Julius Caesar. Pandemonium Moulinex, Boris. There we go. Just finished with one I wrote about 3 hours ago. Dear Mog, it's unbearable that Sunak is giving speeches about Ukraine. Doesn't he get it? The war in Ukraine is mine. I've stood next to a tank. I've put on military togs. I've stood next to Zelensky. Ukraine is me just as Michelangelo is Athens. Multi-Haribo delirium. As I say, Roger told me to talk tradition, and just to be serious for a moment, one tradition that's been very strong in my life are the radical poets, but also the collections of radical poetry that have gone down through the years, some of them that I inherited from my parents. And so I just wanted to do a little kind of, a little survey, if you like, So on my shelves, I didn't bring them all in, from 1895, Songs of Freedom, selected and edited by H.S. Salt, who will be a familiar name to some of you, with this wonderful poem that some of you may know, that comes from 1885, about Riel the Rebel, that's R-I-E-L, Riel the Rebel, who was executed in I can't quite read it, my eyes aren't good enough, I lost an eye, thank you, 1885, for leading an insurrection of Franco-Indians in the northwest of Canada. He died at dawn in the land of snows, a priest at the left, a priest at the right, the doomed man praying for his pitiless foes, and each priest holding a low, dim light to pray for the soul of the dying. But Windsor Castle was far away, and Windsor Castle was never so gay, with her gorgeous banners flying. The hero was hung in the windy dawn. 'Twas splendidly done, the telegraph said. A creak of the neck, then the shoulders drawn, a heave of the breast, and the man hung dead. And oh, never such valiant dying, with Windsor Castle far away, with its fops and fools on that windy day, and its 1,000 banners flying. Some starving babes where a stark stream flows, twixt windy banks by an Indian town, a frenzied mother in the freezing snows, while softly the pitying snow came down to cover the dead and the dying. But Windsor Castle was gorgeous and gay, with lion banners that windy day, with lying banners flying. Great poem. I'll just read a verse of this one. 1924, Poems of Revolt, chosen by Joan Beauchamp. And here's a famous anonymous song, some of you may know it well. We have fed you all for 1,000 years, and you hail us still unfed, though there's never a dollar of all your wealth but marks the workers dead. We have yielded our best to give you rest, and you lie on crimson wool. For if blood be the price of all your wealth, good God, we have paid in full. Poems of Freedom from 1938 was a Left Book Club publication from my mum and dad's shelves. So I can remember as a kid sitting in the front room with these rows of these orange books and wondering what they were, and my dad would occasionally throw them at me for my homework if I came home from school, and he'd say, well, you know, because both my parents were teachers. Think about that for a moment. You know, when they asked you, you know, what did you do in school today, they bloody meant it. I'd say, what did you do in school today? And I'd go, well, you know, sort of stuff. And I go, what sort of stuff? I don't know, sort of history or something. Like, history? That's really interesting. Well, no, actually. Well, what are you doing in history? And I'd say, well, I don't know, so Chartist. Chartists? Oh, well, that's really interesting. Well, what have you got to do on Chartists? And I'd say, well, it's an essay. What's the essay called? Why Chartism Failed. Failed? Chartism didn't fail. Book, Why Chartism Didn't Fail by Old C.P. for Michael Rosen. My parents were what Hitler called Jewish communists. They were parents as well, actually. I don't know how they managed that at the same time, but anyway, they did. So here from that collection, Recruited Poplar, March 1917, from Margaret Postgate, who, if I remember rightly, was either the mother or grandmother of Oliver Postgate, who brought you Bagpuss, and the Clangers. Anyway, I won't go on. That means end of imperialism. You think I'm joking? He was interviewed, and I think that's what he said it meant. There was a secret message in the Clangers. Some of you didn't pick it up. They say, and that's the bugles going all the day, past Cooper's Arms and round by Stepney Way, till you'll be mad for hearing them play. They say. You were the finest stuff men ever had to make into a soldier, and they say, They put the needed strength and spirit in you, straightened your shoulders, made you clean and true, and fit for England's service. I can say they clothed you warm and fed and worked you fair the first time in your life on Derby Day. Maybe that did a little. Anyway, they made a man out of you this year, the sort that England's rich and proud to own, they say, they say, they say. And so they went and killed you. That's their way. And one of my favourite books on my parents' shelves was Spokesman for Liberty, by Jack Lindsay, edited by Jack Lindsay and Edgar Rickword from 1939. And I'll just give you, was the first time I ever saw this little rhyme that some of you will know very well. The law locks up the man or woman who steals a goose from off the common, but leaves the greater villain loose, who steals the common from the goose. And then I got together with somebody called David Widgery, who none of you have heard of. And we produced the first of all called the Chatto Book of Dissent, and then became the Vintage Book of Dissent. And I'll read you a quick one from there by Lord Byron. And he wrote a little poem, very, very important, very serious poem, about Castlereagh. Castlereagh was the Chief Secretary for Ireland, the Butcher of Ireland, and then became the Foreign Secretary, and I think became a butcher in India as well, so he practiced butchering. So after he died, George Gordon Lord Byron wrote, "Posterity will ne'er survey a nobler grave than this. Here lie the bones of Castlereagh. Stop, traveller, and piss." Then we zoom forward to 2007 when Bookmarks published my book, Fighters for Life. Many thanks to you, Bookmarks. And in there's a true story. We're talking about fascists one way or another. It's a true conversation I had with a bloke. I didn't question whether he was a fascist, but this is what he said. He said, "I can't stand it anymore. It's doing me head in. This place used to be like a village." "Oh, what's the matter with it?" I said. "It's full of foreigners," he said. "I love Walthamstow," he said, "but I can't stay here. I'm going." I wondered where. I said nothing. He didn't say anything else, so I said, "Where to?" "Spain." I'll finish here. So in 2020, I should have died. That's what I was supposed to have done. I tried, but there were a lot of people who didn't let me. They're called nurses and doctors, and some of the most amazing people I've ever met, and they didn't want me to die. So though I was in a coma for 40 days and 40 nights, I wasn't Jesus. That was just testing your biblical knowledge. And I wasn't Noah either, testing you a bit more there. But as it happens, I'd written a poem some years before I tried to die for the 60th anniversary of the NHS. And one of the first things I saw when I woke up was the poem on the wall. And various people said that they in fact pinned it up all round, and then I found that heard that Michael Sheen had actually recited it on the radio. So it seemed to have, so what do you say, sounded a chord, touched a chord, what's the phrase? Yeah, that's it, one of those, anyway, chords. And so I thought I'd finish by reading you this. Okay. "These are the hands that touch us first, feel your head, find the pulse, and make your bed. These are the hands that tap your back, test the skin, hold your arm, wheel the bin, change the bulb, fix the drip, pour the jug, replace your hip. These are the hands that fill the bath, mop the floor, flick the switch, soothe the sore, burn the swabs, give us a jab, throw out sharps, design the lab. And these are the hands that stop the leaks, empty the pan, wipe the pipes, carry the can, clamp the veins, make the cast, log the dose, and touch us last." Thanks very much.
fantastic way to end what has been a wonderful evening. Michael, we are incredibly grateful to those nurses for the hard work they did. And of course, we're grateful to all of the NHS staff. That is precisely why we should be supporting them in their struggle, as we should be supporting all of the workers who are taking action at this moment. It's fantastic to see that struggle continuing and growing. It has been a fantastic evening. I want to finish by thanking on your behalf the staff who, all of the people who've been involved in Bookmarks over the years, but certainly the staff who are currently working in the bookshop: Katie Elliott, Josh Largent, Chris Ayton, Colin Bryce, Noel Halifax, Jim Bradley, and of course, Ursula Hawthorne, who you heard from. The very best tribute you can pay to them, though, is if you haven't already taken out a standing order to Bookmarks to support what Bookmarks does. There are standing order forms here, so as you mingle, as we finish, go and get yourself one of these, fill it in, and help to ensure that Bookmarks continues for very many years.